Welcome to the Community Development Podcast, a podcast dedicated to community development practice and approaches, sharing our learning and connecting the workforce. My name is Russell. So welcome to episode 45 of the Community Development Podcast. I am in a soggy, wet Cardiff in South Wales, but we are returning to Scotland for this episode. We were with Catherine Wheeler, Development Director at the Stove Network in Dumfries in Scotland for the last episode, and Catherine was talking about creative placemaking, the network that they have across a large part of Scotland called What We Do Now, that talks about placing artistic creative practice at the heart of building communities, designing places, giving people a stake in their community, all that kind of thing. As I said, we're heading back to Scotland and we're heading back to Fallin, which I've been mispronouncing for the last couple of weeks while we've been preparing this, and I'd like to welcome to the podcast Naomi Ross and Nikki Thomas. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
That's okay. Naomi, you and I chatted a few weeks ago. You reached out expressing interest in coming on to talk about some of the work, the environmental climate action work that you're involved in there in Fallin. I say a few weeks, it was possibly a few months ago, and you sort of said, listen, let's leave it maybe till the autumn. We've got a few things in the pipeline. A couple of developments will have happened by then, so that'll be an ideal time. Nikki, this is the first time you and I have had a chance to chat, or meet virtually at the very least. And I'm grateful that you're struggling through a bit of a cough as well.
Thank you.
So yeah, soldiering on. So tell us a little bit about yourselves. Naomi, you're a trustee with Fallin Community Voice. Tell us a bit more about your role there.
Yeah, sure. So, I've been a trustee with the charity since it's been for about a year now. And the charity as a whole is also a really young one, first incorporated back in January 2022, so still very much in our infancy. I'm the treasurer for the charity, but my kind of main focus and main area of passion really is around the climate side of things, and in particular the community garden, which is how I got involved in the charity in the first place.
Nikki, like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I joined in with Fallin Community Voice just under a year ago. It was last November, actually. I can't believe how time has flown. I mean, I've worked in the charity sector for, nearly 20 years now. And over the last year or two, I've taken a sort of accidental divert into the world of climate change, community gardening, and came across Naomi and Fallin Community Voice through another community garden, a more established one in Stirling that I also work in. And it just seemed to be a match made in heaven. And I was just so excited about coming from a place where it had already been going sort of 8 to 9 years to one where I could be really hands-on and instrumental in bringing it through from the very start, which was absolutely fantastic, and in an area which doesn't have anything else like that at the moment.
And I can't wait to get stuck into some, like a little bit of dirt under the fingernails, as it were. But Naomi, tell us a little bit more about Fallin and where you're based. Nikki mentioned Stirling there. That's probably the nearest sort of principal town, if anyone is aware of the sort of the geography of your part of Scotland. But tell us a little bit about it, and it's coal mining, industrial history as well, which is something which resonates with me, as I've said before on these episodes, being based in South Wales as well.
Yeah, that's right. So most folk that know Stirling generally have no idea where Fallin is. It's not a tourist area, being ex-mining. Generally, if you're coming to Fallin, you're doing so to go through to either Airth or Falkirk or somewhere else, or the closest that you might be getting is the local tip, which is just a mile down the road from us. So it really is a residential village. It's about 3 miles south of Stirling, and it's quite isolated. There's just Fallin, which is about 2,800 people. And then our next again village is another kind of mile down the road. I think Nikki's already touched on the fact that there's not really an awful lot in the village at the moment. It's been that way since the coals closed, and it's just been kind of quite a steady decline since then, sadly. So what we do have tends to be, we've got a few takeaway restaurants, Indian, Chinese, that kind of thing. We've got a miners' welfare, which is still really active, which is great, and a community-owned pub, one of the old Gothenburg pubs. So that's one of the oldest community-owned pubs in the country, and it's got a wee bowling club attached to it. So that's another kind of quite popular place. But we don't have, beyond that, there's really nothing. We don't even have a local coffee shop that people can just meet up in for a wee coffee. And that's something that we're really looking to kind of try and change through the community garden to make it more than just somewhere that people can grow food and flowers, and actually turn it into a social space for people to be able to use and meet and grow the community as a whole.
I mean, you mentioned things like, miners' welfare, sort of community-owned pubs, something I'm really interested in as well. So it's clearly, and back in the days when coal would have been, and the mines would have been active, there would have been that kind of social infrastructure, cultural, maybe sporting around the colliery, if it was anything at all like the ones I'm familiar with. So a history of people kind of getting involved and doing things for themselves then, and perhaps, still shoots of that, if that's one way of putting it.
Yeah.
And is that behind some of the activities that Community Voice are putting together? Is that a more modern expression of that kind of community action, or that community kind of coming together?
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite new to the village. I've been here since 2018, which in Fallin terms is very much new incomer. A lot of the folk here are born and bred, multi-generation, all of that kind of stuff. And what I kind of have seen since moving here, so I've lived all over the UK. This is, I think, my 17th place that I've lived in, something like that. And the sense of community and generosity of spirit that is here is a cut above what exists anywhere else that I've lived. And that's been, I think that's something that's really stemmed from everything that the village went through with the mining strikes. It was the first pit to go on strike, and ended up being the last pit in the UK to close as well. And it was one of the real kind of driving forces behind getting the other coal areas in Scotland to go on strike as well. A huge part of why it ended up being one of the longest running ones was because of the community spirit. And we've got a lot of kind of old, not just photos and things, but stories from the people that are here of their time at the miners' welfare, where everyone just got together, had their community meals. And, the folk our age now that were in there as kids really didn't see it as a hardship. It was a fun time for them. They were in getting their food, playing with their pals, all that kind of stuff. And it's only been like, as they've looked back, that they've realised exactly what was going on at the time. And that generosity of spirit has really continued through. I think there's probably been a lot of hardship, and there have been some periods where there's been a real dent in that, and a bit of kind of hopelessness and apathy and things. But since COVID, when there was a real kind of reignition of that community spirit, things have just kind of gone from strength to strength again, which has been really lovely to see. And Fallin Community Voice has played a huge part in that.
Yeah, no, it's terrific to hear. So Nikki, tell us a little bit about this community garden, and I'm sure that'll lead on to some of the other kind of environmentally, climate action focused things that are going on.
Yes, yeah, sure, I'm sure it will. And I guess just before that, just touching on a couple of things that Naomi's just said, I think, and I'm sure there's a lot of local people who would agree with me, that Fallin should be a tourist destination, 100%. Because, and I'm tying in with the village as a whole, one, because of the mining history and the information we've got there, but the Bing, you've probably not heard of that, Russell, and this wonderful big hill that we've got that was basically left over of everything that was getting taken out of the mine. My history is not as good as everyone else's, so I'm sure I'll be corrected on one or two things, but you can get a 360-degree view of the whole of Forth Valley up there, and it is absolutely stunning. And just to mention that Stirling Council have just upgraded our cycle paths as well into Stirling, so it just really starts to make it much more of a destination, and the destination that it should be. So it's not all just about the castle and the Wallace Monument. The whole area has so much to offer. It's fantastic. And I think it's fair to say, going back to the mining days, and this, I've never felt so welcomed. And like Naomi, I have moved around a lot in my career, UK wide. And the way I have just been accepted with open arms, no questions asked. I've never experienced anything like this. But I think it's fair to say that the sort of challenges and the adversity current day compared to back in, the 80s and following on from the mining strike is quite different. It was probably more a collective adversity I would say, a few decades ago, whereas now households and families are probably struggling with the same things, but you're doing it much more on a siloed basis. So if
Yeah.
there's a way that either Fallin Community Voice in general and all the projects that they wonderfully do, from Christmas lights and summer fun days, and, you know, in particular from my perspective, the garden, if there's a way that we can try and bring that all together for people and bring, you know, that cumulative voice, you know, give us a strength to what matters to people, build that capacity, who are the new leaders in the local area and the village coming through. And it's not just about environmental, that's one of the biggest ones, of course it is, but I think it's really fair to say, and people in the village will agree with me on this, they don't really see the environmental and the climate impact as something that affects them directly. And I don't think Fallin is alone in that in any way. And it's how do we go about bringing people together? How do we bring that level of understanding and confidence, but without I think it's fair to say climate change, when you're talking about it, can be quite scary to people. If you're not living that, if you're not working in that sphere, it doesn't seem accessible. And the garden in particular, we see as a ways we can make it accessible for people and make it in the daily actions that people can do. So if that's recycling, if that's reducing food waste, and some of the smaller things that we can all do on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I think that's a couple of fascinating points actually. And if you ever want a job in the Fallin Tourist Board, then I think there'll be an opening for you for sure. I absolutely agree that broader kind of point about previous times and eras of, I should put it, sort of economic distress. Then, you know, whether that's depressions and major recessions and obviously kind of like the real pinch points of deindustrialization and obviously the strike and things like that. That sense of people coming together to get through those adversities, I think, is in contrast to these days where I think you're absolutely right. There's more of an individualistic and kind of privatized form of coping. I think that's a fascinating point. But also that sense that the community garden isn't a project about a garden per se, and however nice and pleasant and relaxing and a nice place to tend to one's mindfulness. It is for sure. I've no doubt. It's as a means to a broader end, if I'm hearing you correctly, around, okay, while we're here, what else can we talk about? How can we use it as that kind of gateway into what are some fairly existential, it feels sometimes existential issues that are just really hard to kind of wrap one's head around, and that's before we even decide, you know, do we trust this news source or do we trust that post on Facebook, and you know, and all of that kind of thing. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think when we're working with our volunteers and things in the community garden, what's been really interesting from our side, I think, is we've got folk who are coming along who are, they're there in part because of the kind of climate stuff, but the vast majority of them aren't. They're there because they know that we're looking to help feed people in the village, and they're absolutely on board with that as the right thing to do. There's some that get that nature is in crisis and they want to help out with that side of things. There are folk who recognise it'll help tackle social isolation and they're really keen from that side. But we do have some people volunteering with us already who are out and out climate change deniers, and yet they're still getting stuck in about and still, you know, helping with quite heavy lifting work. And, you know, as far as we're concerned, who cares? If they're helping out, then that's great. And maybe down the line we'll end up being able to kind of bring them round. That's possibly a stretch too far, but you know, it does mean that we're able to start opening up some of those conversations with people on a face-to-face basis, rather than being sat on a laptop on Facebook, you know, where you can end up being quite radicalized one way or the other. It can really just kind of bring everybody together and hopefully move us forward in ways that they, you know, they don't necessarily realize that they're climate related things, but they see other benefits to it and so are happy to kind of go along. And that's been really, really positive for us, I think.
And I think it's important to recognise that the way we want our garden to be is we want it to be offer something to everyone. But we also recognise that it'll mean something different to everyone. And you were already touching on that, Naomi. Some people want to come to the garden because they don't want to talk to anyone. They've maybe got a very busy family life at home, and they want to come and get that bit of solace and almost mindfulness, like you were saying, Russell. Whereas there's other people that maybe don't speak to anybody else during the day, and that is their outreach, and that's how they connect within their community. And I think what's wonderful is we're really seeing a change in that curriculum now, see for the school kids as well, and that's starting from nursery age upwards. So we're already actively involved with both Fallin Primary and Nursery. We're engaging with a couple of other youth groups. We've got the Justice Service from the council are going to be coming out and working alongside us, and hopefully increasing skills and confidence and rehabilitation back into the community, and as well as several other partners as well. We've already had a couple of volunteering days. We've got another couple hopefully coming up over the next few months as well, even into the winter months. And I think people need to understand that community gardens run in the winter as well. It doesn't mean it's always warm. It doesn't mean it's always dry. But, it's still making sure that we're there in some way or another for people. And Naomi has got wonderful plans for us, having a lovely warm space for people to come and chat and drink coffee, even when it is the really dark days, which we're looking forward to.
Yeah, I've got my interior design storyboard all worked out for the space.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll give you a chance to talk a little bit more about that. But never underestimate either, of course, the value of places that people can go to where there's no obligation to spend money or to, well, as you say, and maybe act as they want to act. I guess within the realms of society and decency, of course. But that sense of today I'm there and I fancy a chin wag with somebody, but today I'm just there to compose my thoughts and just to get away from it all, and never underestimate the value of that. I'm sure you don't, but that's more of a general kind of plea. I think the increasing kind of commodification, privatization of space, and that kind of imperative, even if it is only a couple of quid for a coffee or whatever it is, that can still be quite a lot of money for some people. And spaces and places where people there's no obligation to spend money, I think dare I say, increasingly few and far between, and they tend to be found in areas of sort of green space and gardens, notwithstanding other kind of public buildings, libraries and things. But of course there's always pressure on those in terms of opening hours and what have you. These green spaces and gardens and the like are crucial. And I think the pandemic reinforced that for those of us who already knew it, and maybe opened the eyes of a few people perhaps who weren't so alert to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly our local library in the village is one of hundreds of them that's under threat and being constantly put through review and at risk of closure. So anything that we can do to kind of mitigate with our own spaces is something that we're really kind of keen to do. Just touching on the price side of things as well, I think something that we've not really mentioned yet is the kind of model that we're going for with the garden. So it's worth flagging just now, I guess, that we're still at the implementation stage. We literally got the lease signed, the planning permission through last month, and we're getting the lease finalised this month. So next month we should have boots in the ground, everything kind of really kicking off with people able to actually access the garden properly before the end of the year. But we'll be operating, at least for the first 12 months, on a pay-as-you-feel basis, and that'll be across the board. So for everything from membership of the garden on a social basis to taking out a raised bed for a year. And if people are coming by for coffees, then they can either give a donation if they want, or if they can't afford or don't want, that's absolutely fine as well. And once we open our kind of wider cafe, we'll be looking to run that on the same basis. And again, any food that's produced on site that we'll be offering out, we'll be doing the same again. We know that that's quite a risky model, but again, one of the things that we've really found with folk in the village is that although we have a lot of people who are really struggling, we also have a lot who are incredibly generous, particularly when they know that it's going to a good cause and going to something that's directly benefiting the village as a whole. So we are quite optimistic that we should be able to kind of balance that fairly well.
And I think it's fair to say that's something that we would balance with our own funding aspirations as well, and
Yeah.
where we get our funds from, one, to develop this from its complete inception, how to keep that going, but then also what self-generating income we can look at as well, so further down the line, ideally we'd love to have a community cafe, and it's not about making the money, it's about bringing in money so we can keep going and enhance what we do and what we
Yeah.
offer. We don't know what this is going to look like in 1 or 2 years' time. We've got a very good idea about what people need and want and maybe envisage it to be now. But as the community comes more on board, and as that really starts to develop and it becomes quite organic, and we want to be able to move with that as well. Now, one of my roles is bringing in as much funding as we can. And am I okay to say thank you to some of our funders just now, Russell?
By all means, by all means.
So we've got a few key ones. So we've had the Robertson Trust, the Clack Manager and Stirling Environment Trust, the Stafford Trust Grant, the Mushroom Trust, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, the Forth Valley and Lomond CLLD Rural Fund. That's not easy to say when you've had a cold. The National Lottery Fund Awards for All, and the Communities Mental Health and Wellbeing Fund as well, which have all been, they're just instrumental for us getting our main infrastructure off the ground. So when you're talking about security fencing, perimeter fencing to keep out the deer, the rabbits, and any other little torags that are running around. There's a few people that have said, "Oh, everything you build is going to get wrecked," and we're certainly not going to take that as an excuse not to do something. So we're going to do as much as we can. We're going to bring in 2 large polytunnels, both like 8 by 20 meters. So one's going to be a growing space where you can do all your greenhouse growing. So that can be both by volunteers and individuals. The other space, we're going to use that as a social, educational community space. We're going to have a bundle of raised beds of varying size and design, just so that people, whether it's school kids, whether it's people in wheelchairs and people who have more sort of physical ailments, they're as accessible as possible. A large communal tool shed, so that you don't need 100 spades on site. You probably need a small handful, and then everybody just uses as you go. So as Naomi was saying about the cost side, we want to reduce. There should be no financial burden on people coming to use our garden, and that's our goal for this. And there's something about the whole just reuse and recycle within the community as well. And then with the clubhouses that we're going to bring in, so hopefully longer term community cafe, but then having that warm clubhouse space where people can get that free cup of tea, come and put the heating on if they're maybe struggling at home a little bit, get access to Wi-Fi as well. And we can make that. There's a couple of other organisations we work with closely in the village. So for the likes of Strathcarron, one of our colleagues wants to come and base himself there of an afternoon during the week, more than welcome to do that. And that just widens and deepens the sense of community. But we could not do that. All of those main things cost a fortune to literally put on the ground. So without our funders, we would not have been able to do that. And then everything else going forward will just be that maintenance and growth and development as we go forward.
There's also a huge cost further down the line elsewhere to the state, etc., when these things are absent as well. So it can be seen as a cost, it can be seen as an investment. And that brings to mind the chat we had a couple of episodes ago with Donal and Connor in Ireland about, putting a sum, but that's a financial sum, but it's only part of the story, and being clear that it's only part of the story when one talks about impact, but putting a sum on some of the community investment impact that their investments have there. So looking at things like climate crisis, climate action, climate change, those kind of big headline topics. I mean, are you able to give a flavour of the sort of, even if it is literally just discussions that people are having, conversations that people are having, that it's generated around some of those bigger issues?
So I think it's probably fair to say that a lot of that is being approached in a very, very softly way. There's not much by way of direct conversation on that front yet, and I think it'll be a while before that does come. But what we are looking at the moment is areas of need in the village that have direct ties to climate change. So, for example, we've got an ever declining public transport service that has obvious climate change impacts, and it's something that is affecting the village quite significant. A lot of people in the village are frontline workers. They need to travel to get to the kind of jobs that they do, and the service that we've got isn't just pretty much non-existent, it's also extremely unreliable. So we're pressuring the council and the service provider at the moment to try and do more there. If we get to the end of the road on that and find that actually there is simply no support and they're not prepared to put anything else in place for us, then one of the things that we are thinking about going forward is how we as a village and as a charity can deal with that. So whether it's putting on a community bus or trying to find like a car share service or volunteer driving service for people that need to get to hospital appointments and that kind of thing. So anything that we can really do to reduce the amount of cars that are on the road, but without couching it in a climate change way, focusing more on what does the community need and what's important to folk in the village. Similarly, obviously, everyone's pretty stressed out about the continuing volatility in fuel prices, and that's something that feels like a very helpless thing and that there's not much that we can do about. But again, as part of our long-term planning, we've got our eye on land in the village to potentially do a community buyout on and look to get a community solar farm in place so that we can help to kind of offset some of that energy dependency. And then, Nikki's touched on the community shed that we'll have in the community garden. We're thinking about ways that we can potentially expand that to be a wider kind of sharing library, so expanding from just your kind of garden things to more DIY tools, potentially toy libraries, hiring out of events, goods things. We've just bought a candy floss machine that we're using for our own charity event. But we could potentially look at leasing things like that out so that folk aren't buying new, they're not using their own stuff. That helps people's purses at the end of the day as well. So within the village, we're not really talking about climate change and how we can take climate action. We're looking at what are the dual benefits of how we can help people in the village, or how people in the village can help themselves, and how we can come together as a collective with things that also happen to have benefits to the planet as well. The only real kind of, I guess, organised discussion that we've had on it, which Nikki probably is better kind of to talk about the relationship side of things there, but we have had in our Fourth Landscape initiative come in with some consultants to do some work in the village since February, March of this year. Looking at helping us develop a local resilience plan that has a climate and heritage focus to it. And that's been a series of workshops in the village that have looked at what climate change is, what heritage is, what heritage means to people in the village, and ultimately how people would like a pot of money that they have available to be spent in the village to protect heritage assets from climate change. So that again wasn't 100% focused on climate change. There was a slightly different angle to hook people from the village in, but it did at least get folk who wouldn't otherwise be thinking about climate change starting to think about it. And certainly there were a lot of people around the table there who said that, they just either weren't aware at all, or their understanding of, what could be done and things were very limited and had improved from it. So we're starting to do things like that, but it's a very, very softly approach that we're taking. In part because, again, obviously we've talked about the whole issue of helplessness, but I think also there can be quite a lot of kickback when you start to talk to people about, have you considered your climate impact and things that you can do to minimise, from people who don't have very much anyway, or people who already have quite low footprints, who are looking at, people that are using private jets, large corporations that are absolutely spilling God knows what out, and they're looking going, well, why are we the ones that are being asked to do this when these people are being allowed to continue doing X, Y, and Z? And so you want to just make sure that you're avoiding angering people or getting people riled and preaching to them, I guess.
No, absolutely. And I think as well, the elephant in the room with an area like yours then is that when we talk about fossil fuels, we're also talking about, one of those things that, essentially gives these communities, it largely perhaps accounts for why they are there, or certainly why they are there in the form and the shape they are now anyway. It is a defining characteristic of these communities, and it goes beyond just economy and jobs. It's around that social fabric that grew up around the colliery and so on that I mentioned earlier. And I think we have to recognise that, like you said,
Yeah,
certainly
absolutely.
where there's maybe an imbalance in terms of wealth, affluence, resource, etc., that we can't just sort of pin all of this on those evil fossil fuels, because actually those fossil fuels, or one form of them, have come to define the very community and sense of community and connection with place that we're also trying to take action. I sometimes wonder whether that is missed by a certain constituency, shall I say, then within the the very pro, and they would no doubt argue progressive aspect and constituency of the climate change agenda.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's really important. Folk in our village should absolutely be proud of the work that they did back in the day when they were going, the people in this village were literally going down into the pits, risking their life. Many of them gave their lives so that we could have the kind of life that we have today. And they weren't the organisations themselves, the fossil fuel industry organisations, may well have been aware 30 years ago of what the impact was that they were having, but at the time, it had a very direct impact on the people that were going down in the mines. For the folk that didn't die when they were down there, they certainly came away with a lot of respiratory illnesses and, had a really, really tough time of it, so that everybody else, all of us today, can have the comforts and things that we have through what has been the Industrial Revolution. And I think sometimes that can be talked about with a degree of shame, or as though people should feel ashamed of that. And I just think that's completely wrong. The village has played a huge defining role in getting us to where we are now. And what I'm really keen for us to do going forward is be part of the solution to where we are now and where we need to be. There's absolutely no reason that we can't be working towards cleaner, greener energy and adopting cleaner, greener energy, having shorter supply chains, being more self-sufficient, and being one of thousands and thousands of communities across the UK and around the world that are collectively pushing us to where we need to be in today's kind of climate era.
But the thing is, it needs to be affordable, it needs to be accessible, and at the moment, to the majority of us, it's not. It really,
Absolutely.
really isn't. I mean, what I found, and anyone who works in community development will tell you this, these are the changes, these are the nuances, they need to be driven from within as well. You cannot bring in consultants, you cannot bring in politicians to be leading on this. You need them sometimes to facilitate it or give that power of voice, but it needs to be absolutely driven from Fallin. And the perfect example of that was when Naomi touched on the Inner Forth Landscape work alongside the RSPB that recently happened in Fallin this year. And we had a fantastic turnout. I was so chuffed. And there was people that came along that said, well, I didn't really know what this was about. And I just thought I'd come, and it felt like a bit of a safe space to ask questions. And there was, I think it was 6 sessions over 3 topics that we did. And in each one, it was a really diverse group of people, some really quite knowledgeable, some going, right, when am I going home to make my dinner? See, by the end of it, they were really coming together. They were really pinpointing what was important to them, what was important to the community and to the village, and how strongly they felt about looking after it and having something left, not just for them, but their children and the next generations after that, which I think if that hadn't been really pushed from a community development side, that conversation would never have happened. And it possibly doesn't sound like big steps just now, but for us and for Fallin, that was. And if that's our starting point, and if we can make that grow from there, then that we can only get it better. But it needs to be affordable and it needs to be accessible, which it just isn't at the moment.
No, all power to you. All power to you. I think it's really.
Sorry.
No, that's. I think that was an endorsement for your broader point. I think. But I think it's interesting, again, you're referring to sort of community development, and this is the focus of the podcast. This is the, primarily, I guess, the audience for these episodes. It's that working in the cracks, in the fissures between, bits of the community, maybe between different communities and so on. Those who understand and maybe are early adopters, as it were, to understanding climate change or the need to take action, and those who are perhaps a little bit slower to recognise that. Maybe indeed some people who are maybe still quite resistant to it as well. I would argue it's always kind of community workers people doing community work, whether they define themselves as that is another question. They're the ones in those spaces helping to bring people together and create those safe spaces, as you say, because I think any change process or in any change process, that the people advocating or wanting and encouraging change, if they're only ever talking to people who are already in agreement with them, it's not going to happen. So we need to create those spaces, whether it's about climate or other things, other issues.
Yeah.
We need to create those spaces where people are able to come and feel a little bit able to say, I don't know, I don't understand, I still don't get it, or I'm not so sure. And to critique, that discussion, that discourse is fine. And doesn't happen all too often on social media increasingly. So those, and there is a time.
And people don't trust.
No, and there is a time and a place for digital spaces. I mean, this is what we're doing now, of course. But if it can be face to face, then I think all the better. Sorry, you're going to say.
Yeah, I think, not just face to face, but also with people that you know and trust. I think nobody trusts a stranger coming and telling them, oh, you should be doing this or that, or this is important or whatever. Whereas if you're talking to somebody who you've sat down and had a meal with, or, they're at least a friend of someone that you know, then you're far more likely to be open to new ideas and things than a stranger or an official or someone telling you it's the right thing to do. And I think that's why the kind of community side of things is so important. I think with the climate action stuff, so much focus is put on big shiny projects, and tens of thousands of pounds will be ploughed into campaigns and all this kind of stuff, and that's great, and a lot of it's needed. But from my personal experience, I feel as though actually a lot of it is far more boring than that. It is, basic one-to-one conversations with people. It's leading by example yourself without preaching to people. It's, lending somebody your drill or your ladder, or making sure that there are things available to people so that they're not making things as easy as possible. And, those kinds of things don't grab headlines, and they're not exciting in the same ways. But that's what you need to do.
Yep.
What I call the critically mundane. Yeah, for sure. It sounds very much like you have an idea of a library of things. You might not be calling it that, or maybe you are, but you haven't used the phrase. Wonderful. Again, it's back to an episode we had with Becky Harford, one of the founders of Benthyg Cymru in Wales, which is more of a network of library of things across Wales. And I'm in the process of setting one up locally with me. We've got a meeting, our first community meeting, on 2 days from now. Having just set that organisation up, and we've got a little bit of lottery money that's been allocated to us. We're working with it's a football club, a grassroots football club here. So not your Cardiff Cities, it's a club called Cardiff Draconians, fully amateur club, and they've come forward and said, listen, we've got us a space that we think is perfect for what I think you're talking about, and they've come to the rescue. They're proof that not all superheroes wear capes, because we were really struggling to find somewhere to set up, and location for these things is key. In my experience, and generally doing a little bit of work with Benthyg, but also specifically in this community. Just on that point there around candy floss machines, we haven't got one of them. I'm going to add that to the wish list, add that to our Christmas list maybe.
You can pick them up second hand on eBay for about 150 quid if you're patient.
Because who needs a brand new one? Who needs to buy one?
Exactly.
Which is obviously the ethos for libraries of things. And all credit with you on that. And maybe we can keep in touch and share stories with each other. But I love how this concept of just he says in inverted commas, a garden, a space where people come together, can be the catalyst for all of these other sort of discussions. It provides different gateways for different people for whom maybe motivation isn't climate or the environment, but maybe it's a much more overt sense of social justice or wanting equality. Others, it might be something for young people to do more, or whatever that's the real primary driving motive might be for somebody. There does seem to be a pathway for them to and through yourselves, which I think is brilliant. Well done.
Thanks.
Thank you.
The library of things stuff that you're talking about there as well. So we do. Stirling itself has a really well established tool library, which is based in the city centre. And I guess it's worth kind of flagging that basically we're just stealing the idea from them. But part of the reasoning for that is exactly as you say, like location is key. And for folk in Fallin, getting out to the tool library in the city centre is quite tricky if they don't have a car. They can't exactly, cart a large apple press or drill or ladder or whatever on the bus with them. So for us, we're hoping that if we've got something that's walking distance for everybody, they always know when it's open, they always know that they can just pick up the phone or whatever, then it should kind of encourage greater uptake of that. So just wanted to kind of acknowledge Transition Stirling and the fact that we're stealing their idea.
No. That's the best ideas are there to be stolen. I'm a firm believer in that. I know of a couple of Benthigs, one in Penarth, just outside Cardiff. They have cargo bikes, so they'll deliver stuff with a big cargo bike. Again, the keeping even the collection of items, the carbon footprint, to a minimum. And then Benthic Cymru operates on behalf of the libraries of things across Cardiff and the Vale of Glamorgan. We have an electric van, so we do deliveries every Friday. And every now and again, I will, if our driver's not available, I will put my hand up to cover. And I love that, trundling around. Again, I'm not saying it's a zero carbon footprint, but it's negligible with an electric van. Yeah, for sure. I'm pretty sure I couldn't prove it, but I'm pretty sure there's been times where I've had conversations with people dropping something off or collecting something, and I might be the first person they've had an opportunity to have a conversation with that day.
Yeah.
Not often.
I can believe that.
But on one or two occasions, I genuinely think that. And I think, again, it comes back to this thing of the critically mundane. Places where we can come and just and sit and take it all in, or to have a chat, have a conversation, to talk about the weather, whatever else it might be. We should never underestimate the power of that. And the importance it is for some people for whom that is more of a rarer part of their weeks and their days, sadly. So, you've mentioned any number of different kind of projects and different kind of offshoots of different things. There can't be anything else that you've got up your sleeve that you've not mentioned. There's tons, but is there anything else that comes to mind? Christmas is coming up. Usually an opportunity to bring people together, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably not. So, I guess the first thing to kind of say is that, Fallin Community Voice isn't a climate charity, it's a community development charity. So probably just worth touching on some of the other things that the charity does as a whole. And we've got 5 other trustees, certainly not just me and Nikki. We've got our chair, Neil Taylor, our secretary, Michelle Robertson, who incidentally won Scotland's Trustee of the Year this year. And you'll find out why in a second. We also have our local minister, Alison Granger, and Karen Perry, who is also on our local community council, who we work in really close collaboration with. So some of the other things.
Steve Rogers.
Thank you, Nikki. Yep, he's new to the board as well. Thanks for keeping me right there. So Christmas coming up, obviously. We have our annual Christmas fair, which we just started last year, which we run at the local church hall. There's a whole load of stall holders at that, tombolas. It's an opportunity for fundraising. We do things like mulled wine. There'll be candy floss again. And alongside that, we have the switching on of the local Christmas tree, and we announce an annual local community hero, which is based on nominations that people put in throughout the year for folk in the village who they think deserve it for whatever reason. And then from that list, the trustees pick somebody from the village. This is the second year that we've done it. Last year it was Laura Kirkwood who won, because she had raised thousands of pounds off her own back for various initiatives in the village, and we give a cash prize for that and a little award. And we have the Christmas lights turned on by one of the children in the village that wins an annual award from the primary school. And we also have the switching on of our Christmas lights, which is something that we're really proud of. That's something that Michelle and Neil have been leading on. So 2 Christmases ago was the first time that Fallin had ever had Christmas lights in the village. And that obviously is at a time where a lot of places have their Christmas lights cut back because they're usually kind of council funded and so on. So we were really pleased for that to be something that we were kind of pushing on. What has been really lovely about it is that the funding for that has all been grassroots. So each individual light is sponsored by either a local business or a local resident, and they get a little plaque alongside the on the lamppost where the Christmas light is that just acknowledges them and has a wee message if there's something that they'd like to say, whether it's, you know, remembering a lost one or promoting their business or that kind of thing. That started quite small back in 2022. This year we now have every single lamppost on the main street in the village covered, which means that anybody driving from Stirling to Falkirk or the other direction has an absolutely fantastic lighting display. Obviously all the kids coming through the village absolutely love it. So that's something that we're really excited about and the village really enjoys. And we're also doing an annual fun day, which again is completely free for everybody. It's another thing that is funded completely from grassroots donations. So a huge part of why Michelle won the Trustee of the Year award was because she's just absolutely phenomenal at raising money from people in the village, whether it's through things like these sponsorships of the lights or bingo nights that she puts on at the Miners' Welfare, themed fundraiser days, like there was a Shania Twain played locally recently, so there was a hoedown event that raised money. So this family fun day is massive. There's loads of inflatables, face painting, stalls, all this kind of stuff. We the last couple that we've done have had between 500 and 600 folk at them, and there's no charge for anything, the exception being if you're buying something from one of the kind of local stalls that people are selling their wares at. But all of the inflatables, all that kind of stuff is completely free. So these are some of the other things that we're doing in the village that aren't specifically climate focused, but that help to kind of add to that feeling of community cohesion. And last week, we also launched the first of our annual autumn-winter weekly community meals, which we run at the local community centre. So those are every Thursday night at 6:00. Again, open to everybody. Initial focus when we first started them was obviously on making sure that people that didn't have much and were struggling to feed themselves or pay their heating bills had a warm space to come and that they got some hot food in their belly. But it's open to everybody. And again, the reason for that being that we want to make sure that there's no stigma there, so people can go along no matter what. It's a safe space for kids to be able to run around and burn off their energy over the dark nights. And again, it really helps to foster that community spirit and community cohesion, because it gives everybody a place to be able to meet up and just chew the fat. So that's running now every week until the end of February. And that's been in part funded by the Cora Foundation and Cash for Kids. So we're really grateful to them for that too.
Wow, tons going on.
Yeah, quite a lot. Most of us have full-time jobs and a couple have family responsibilities and things as well.
But it's important to mention the trustees and the fact that there's people doing this because, I don't know, I sometimes wonder whether there's a tendency that people think this sort of stuff is all the council or it's all, I don't know, whomever, and or it happens by magic or something. And it's important to give people a pat on the back. I think Steve was about to sharpen his pencils, mind, until Nikki,
sure.
Nikki reminded you. And of course, there's also no doubt as well, certainly with the scale of things going on there, there's people who aren't trustees or don't sit in those capacities who are also getting involved and helping out. And there's this. I'm always. I made a reference to a blatant, shameless plug for the book that I recently put out with Alan 12 Trees. Alan and I got together to talk about the book a couple of episodes ago, and I made a point of referring to a park I'm involved in. So it's not in a paid kind of community work kind of context. It's me just doing things in my community, and there's somebody there who has no desire to be on a committee whatsoever, will never come anywhere near the committee, but if we need a gazebo putting up or we need a couple of tables putting up for the fair, is the first one there. And it's important, you touched on this earlier, and it's just reminding me, I was going to say by way of a sort of response to that, it's important that people can find their own ways to get involved. It's not necessarily this is how you must do it, this is how you must get involved, that people can find their own way. And maybe it starts small and grows, or it starts small and maybe it only ever stays small, but nevertheless it's an important cog in the bigger sort of system, so to speak. I think that's important as well. Not everybody is or wants to be a trustee, for example.
For sure. we're completely built off the backs of those people that just want to put up a gazebo. We've got so many volunteers that are just all hands on deck with stuff like that, and we're enormously grateful to them.
Just from a garden perspective, if there is anybody, fairly local, that either one wants to just come along for a visit or a nosy, please get in touch. If anyone wants to donate any of their time and expertise, we have always not got enough expertise on hand. And if anyone even wider, I feel UK-wide, would like to share their stories and their development progress of any similar projects, it'd be really exciting to link up and see how you got on. And if there's anything we can learn from too, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's always something I love to hear about happening off the back of this, that people get in touch, even if it's just exchanging emails, follow us on social media, whatever it might be. I think all that's important. It builds up those much kind of wider, broader sort of solidarities, let alone sharing ideas, whatever else it might be, and things more practical. Like you said, you mentioned their expertise, for example, Nikki. It doesn't even need to be that. It just be a sort of a well done, crack on, love what you're doing. That can mean a lot as well. Speaking of the socials and things, if people are curious about wanting to know a little bit more, maybe get in touch, just keep a watching brief on it all, the myriad of things that you've got going on there, which I'll certainly be doing. What's the best way of doing that?
So we've got a website, which is fallincommunityvoice.org.uk, and you'll find links on there to all of our socials as well, obviously. So we have a Facebook group for the charity as a whole, as well as a Twitter account and an Instagram account. And we've also got a separate Instagram account for the community garden, and that's Fallin Community Garden. There's also, if anybody feels so inclined after hearing what we're doing and wants to provide a donation, there's a link to our Just Giving page on the website as well. So by all means, feel free to nip along to that. That would be lovely.
All power to the both of you and everybody else involved. It's a fascinating the amount of work that you get involved in, and I hope it succeeds, and I'm sure it will. And thank you as well for reaching out as well. I think it was off the back, I don't know whether I put it on socials or LinkedIn or somewhere. I said, listen, anybody wants to come on and share their story, their community work, their community action, community development, however so defined by them, then there's always an opportunity to come on, and I repeat that to anyone listening to this as well. So Naomi, Nikki, I'm hugely grateful for your time and taking an hour out of your day to speak to me. I've really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you, Russell.
Thanks for the opportunity, Russell. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Community Development Podcast. Follow the podcast on Twitter at comdevt podcast, COMMDEVT podcast. And to support the podcast and help it share learning, connect the workforce, and raise the profile and the merits of community development approaches, why not become a Patreon at patreon.com/the CD podcast.